William L. Munns reporting here. Growing up in my hometown in the 1920s, 30s, the time of the Depression, wasn't perhaps the most exciting. For entertainment, if we went to a movie for a dime or a nickel, depending on our age, that was big time, and it was always Westerns. Hopalong Cassidy's and all of those good guys. But then what we did a lot that was fun was camping. And the group of kids was kind of like our gang, made up of kids from all walks of life. And the one boy had a pony that was at the tail end of its age. And we used to pack that pony full of tinning equipment and food, and then we'd go to Dead Dog Falls. And Dead Dog Falls was up on the edge of a farm and had a stream running down through it. And had some fish in there, and we could catch those. They were catfish. And we'd get up there and we'd get our fire to going, and we'd catch some fish, and one guy knew how to clean them, and another knew how to fry them in oil. He'd steal oil from his mom's kitchen. She kept wondering why she didn't have corn oil. We had all of our corn oil. And my dad was a grocer in the town, and so he would give us food and some meat, lunch meat and stuff to eat. And so away we'd go. Usually we had my brother Earl, who always liked to tag along, really didn't enjoy camping. He just wanted to be with the group. And he had a vivid imagination. And our camp out at Dead Dog Falls one summer night, we'd got the tent up and everything was going, and unloaded everything and got our cooking gear and had a good meal, and the fire was going good, and we were shooting a breeze and God knows what else. One guy telling a bigger whopper than another. And so that night we went to bed. We were kind of tired because I took along my gun, shot a couple squirrels. We skinned them out and had some fried squirrel. And you want to talk about good. Fried squirrel was good. And my grandmother, Stone, she taught us how to fix squirrel. She showed us how to skin them, how to cut them up in chunks and fry them. So we had our squirrel meals, and everybody was telling about their girlfriends and how they were making out like mad with them. And that was all in their dreams. They'd never made out with anybody. And so we went to bed that night, and about 2 a.m, my brother Earl woke up and said, Hey, I'm dying. And we said, Well, Earl, what's wrong? He said, I got bit by a spider. He says, I'm dying. You got to pack up and take me home. And we were about 8-9 miles from home because we were going for overnight camping. And we said, you'll be all right. And one, Philo Irvin, that was another one of the guys that camped regularly, he said, I got some salve that'll cure anything. And it was a small bottle of Vicks. And he rubbed down on his bite, and he said, okay, you're all right, Earl. Earl said, no, I'm going to die. So he came over and he says, Bill, you got to take me home. You got to take me home. I said, well, you can walk home. And he says, I don't know how to get home. So I was laughing to myself, and we were saying, well, try to sleep. He put that medicine on it. I got 3 o'clock here. He wakes up again. He says, I got to get home, Bill. I'm going to die. You're going to feel bad. You're going to be the cause of me dying because you won't take me home. And I said, oh, Earl, for God's sakes. We packed up, and there were 5 of us, and we loaded that poor pony down. And then Earl says, I can't walk. I got bit. I got it right. I said, well, we can't leave our stuff here. Somebody will steal it, Earl. You got to walk. He said, well, I'll try. So we started out and going 9 miles in the dark. 3 o'clock in the morning wasn't exactly fast going, and I wasn't sure. I could tell in the daylight because there were points to identify how you get to the Dead Dog Falls. But going back at 3 in the morning, well, we got home. It took us about 4 hours. And then we had to unload the pony because he decided that he was going to die if he had to walk. And we didn't want him to die on us, so we threw all the stuff off and tried to hide it, go back and get it tomorrow, put him on that pony. And he moaned and he complained all the way home. And we got him home, and he woke up my parents. Well, it was about 7. They were up and going strong. And my mother said, what happened? What happened? I said, Earl got a mosquito bite. He thinks it's a spider bite, and he's going to die. And I said, we had to come all the way back from our camping trip. And she went to look at it. She said, well, this isn't anything. Well, we knew it wasn't anything, but what are you going to do when you got a guy crying and he thinks you're going to be the one that lets him die? I said, we couldn't do that. So, and we were tired. Well, we had a big old basement in that home. So we tied that pony out under an apple tree, and we all went down in the basement, and we had sleeping bags and stuff. And that's where we camped out overnight. We ended up camping out overnight. And that's what happens when you got little brothers. Something's always wrong with them. And they got vivid imaginations, you know. Another time, we were fishing. I lived in the Mississippi River in a little community. It was just a spot in the road, really. So we didn't have much money to buy things or go fancy anywhere, but we had fun. We went fishing in the Mississippi River, and we hen fish. And you would get in the river, and they had along the shores caves that went back in under there, and that water would get in there, and the catfish would get in those little caves. So you get under the water, and once you come up, you could breathe because you had kind of like a cavern. And so we could catch the catfish, hen catch them. And this was my buddy with the pony. He went on all the trips with us because he had a pony that would carry all the equipment. And he wasn't brave by a long stretch, but he was a little bit younger than most of us. And he wanted to be a part of the gang, you know. He wanted to have fun. So we took him fishing with us. And he could swim good, so we swam along there. We got in under there, and we caught some of those catfish. And some of those catfish, believe it or not, the commercial fishermen used to catch them on the Mississippi and then fillet them out and sell them to people. And they would weigh 30, 40, 50 pounds, some of them 60 or 70. And talk about scary, a catfish is a scary-looking fish. And they got gills on them, and they stick you. You got to be careful what you're doing. And what you do is you get a glove on your one hand, then you get in under there and feel for them. And if you grabbed them wrong, you get one of those stickers in your hands. Well, some of them had mouths. You'd think that they were like a tiger or a lion, big mouth, and they had rough teeth. And sometimes you'd reach for them and try to get them by the mouth, and they'd chomp down on you, and it was painful. So we got Bob in there, and he was trying it, and he'd get up there close to him, and he'd go, oh, I can't do that, I can't do that. The next thing you know, he'd be in there, and they'd say, oh, Bob, we're not bringing you with us again, you got to grab him. He grabbed and he got inside the mouth and couldn't get his hand out. Got his right hand caught in there, and it was caught on the glove. and it wouldn't let loose. At least with your hand, they let loose. And he was saying, oh, my God, it's going to eat me. It's going to kill me. So we got him out of there, and he was bleeding, Those teeth went right through that glove, and he was bleeding and screaming and calling. We got him out, and we took him home, and we wanted to get him in the house and then drop him off. We didn't want to have to tell his mother what all happened, and if she knew we took him hen fishing in the Mississippi River, she'd have had a cat fit. But we got him home, and we got bandages on him, and we got iodine and everything else, and he was kicking and a squalling. But then we went back home. Before I got home, my mom was waiting for me. And she said, what did you do to Bobby Ayers? I said, I didn't do anything to Bobby Ayers. We've been fishing. And she said, I just got a call from Mrs. Ayers, and they're taking him to the hospital. I said, taking him to the hospital? I don't know what happened to him to take him to the hospital. He got his hand caught in a catfish mouth. She said, you should have heard that. That was the end of the catfishing. No more hand fishing on the Mississippi River. But I tell you, life was a ball then. We thought we were having fun, even when we weren't having fun. But the most fun of all was going watermelon napping. We had this guy in our hometown called Fat Stevens. That guy must have weighed 300 pounds. I don't know how he bent over to plant watermelons, but he had the biggest patch of watermelons down by the Mississippi River there. He had it fenced in with 5-foot-tall fence, and he was down at that patch all through the season. And the big challenge were for us guys to go down there and steal his watermelon. And we had all kinds of guys, little guys, short guys, fat guys, and getting over that fence and getting the watermelons and then bringing them to the fence and handing them back over. So we had 3 of the little guys, and they were fast. And so they would run in there and pick up those watermelons and bring them to the fence. Then the bigger guys would hand them over the fence. And he'd come out there. He had a shotgun. Everybody said, he's got a double-barrel shotgun, and he's got salt in there. And if you get stung by that, you're going to be hurting if he shoots you in the butt or something. I said, he doesn't have any shotguns. You've never heard him of shooting the shotgun, have you? And they said, no, not really, but I think he shoots it up in the air to scare him out. And we went out there, and we cut about 8 watermelons, and there's just 4 or 5 of us. And that gun went off, boom, boom. And boy, we ran out of there, fell down a half a dozen times getting to a fence. And then the 3 of us got over the fence, and the 2 little guys, they couldn't get over the fence. So we had to jump back over the fence and then throw them up and try to get them over the 5-foot fence. And about that time, Joe Moore, he was the newspaper editor's son, he said, I'm shot. And sure enough, he'd hit him with a load of that salt, and it went right through his cloth pants and got all along his butt. Joe was so scared he filled his britches, and he was sure he was going to die. And so we picked him up and threw him over the fence. Then he came down wrong and sprained his ankle. And by the time we got back over the fence, we forgot about stealing the watermelons, and we had to pick him up and take him home. And we weren't about to wake his parents up. This was in the later evening, and he had a big old barn out there on their property, and so we went out into the barn. And so he said, oh, this just burns. It burns. He said, I wonder if they hit me in my privates. He said, it's pretty close. And so one of the guys says, well, I'm not checking it out. So he said, well, could you guys go in the house there? And Mom has some butter in the icebox. Didn't have refrigerators, and they had icebox. And none of us had been in the house, let alone in his mother's kitchen. And so finally one guy said, well, I think I know where it is. I'll go in and check it. I'll try to be real careful. And Joe says, maybe you just better knock on the door. We thought, do you want to knock on the door late at night and wake Mr. Moore up and then catch all kinds of hell. And so we said, oh, we'll try this first. Well, the guy went in, got to the kitchen, but he couldn't turn a light on because he's afraid to wake the family up. So he couldn't remember exactly where the refrigerator was. So he got to a stove, and it had a swing-out door on it. So he thought, well, that's the refrigerator. He stuck his hand in there, and the lid of the stove come up and caught his elbow in there. Then he couldn't get his elbow out. So he didn't come, and then my closest friend, Bobby Blaylock, the preacher's son, he says, Bill, you go in. You go in. I said, no, Bob, it's your idea. You go in. He said, I don't even know where the kitchen is, let alone the refrigerator. So I went in, and luckily, somehow, I found this little bowl of butter. And they weren't froze hard then. It was soft. So I brought that out. We pulled his pants down and everything. And, that salt had burned him bad. So we put all that on, and it felt pretty good going on. But then when it got warm, that butter got warm and so on, it stung twice as bad. He didn't want us to leave him out there alone, and we thought, we got to be getting home. Our folks are going to be wondering where we are. And so everybody left him, and he says, you're not going to leave me, are you, Bill? I said, well, I know I'm going to catch hell for this, but I said, I'll stick with you. And it got to burning him, so I had to go in and wake the parents up. They weren't exactly happy with me, and they thought I'd been leading their little Joe Moore, astray. And I said, look, we just were out trying to have some fun. And Mr. Moore looked at me and said, yeah, you took him out to have fun. You got shot. And he said, I'm going to call your dad. And that was the end of that story. I not only caught a lot of good verbal advice, but I got my dad had this leather strap, and I thought he was going to wear that out on me. But I'll tell you, it was fun during the Depression. There wasn't any money, and all we did. And Halloween, I have to tell you about Halloween then. They say kids today are bad. They're not. But back then, we were downright ornery. They had all these outhouses. Many homes then didn't have indoor toilets, privies. So on Halloween, our little town marshal, his name was Big John Madden, he was geared up for us, and he'd have that car of his with the light on, and he'd be driving all around that little community of 2,800 and letting people know he was out and checking. As fast as he would leave one block, there'd be guys there, and these were guys that were the big guys out of high school. They were pushing over those privies. And boy, you talk about a mess. And, some of those guys were pretty strong, because I remember they lifted a Model A up on a chicken house and set it on the roof up there. And the guy came out, and he was just blazing away with a shotgun. He wasn't actually shooting at the kids because he's afraid he might kill them, but he was shooting up in the air. But those guys swore they just got missed by one of those buckshot. I don't know. It was fun. Fat Stevens, he was the gardener. We stole these watermelons, and we would sneak his apples. He had the most beautiful apples. And I told him, why don't you just put a bushel of apples out where your orchard is, out by the gate? Then kids won't go inside. But it wasn't any fun, just to go pick up an apple out of an apple basket. What was fun was getting over the fence and stealing those apples and running around, and he'd go around and, get out of my apple orchard, you little bastards. He said, I know every one of you. I'm going to talk to your parents tomorrow. It was great fun, Henry. Great fun. Missouri, growing up in a state like Missouri was a real experience. You know what the motto is for the state of Missouri, don't you? The show me state. And we had a lot of stupid kids because we got showed quite a bit. I said we had to learn the hard way. But life, we tried to make life exciting, and we'd go from one muddle to another muddle, and it's a wonder some of us didn't break our necks. I know a whole bunch of us in the hometown were catching barn pigeons. We were going to train these pigeons so they would carry a message from one barn to another barn. And we weren't too sophisticated because it takes a certain type of pigeon, to be a carrier pigeon. And these were nothing but barn pigeons, rock pigeons, we call them. So we'd get up in these barns and we'd catch these pigeons. And there's about 7 or 8 of them had pigeon coops in their own barns. Most every home then had a barn or an outshed or something, and we caught all these pigeons. We were going to send messages to one another. That shows you how sharp we were. And we were junior high school age, and we'd go out to the barn at night and catch them. They would roost in the cupolas and have their nests and things. We'd scout them out in the day and go out and catch them at night. And we'd feed them and we'd take care of them. And we thought, now all we got to do is train them to go back and forth to these barns. So we'd take all these pigeons around and leave them for a week or two at each place and feed them and water them. And I don't know what we weren't thinking, or we weren't real shrewd, because you turn them out, they're going back. They're not going to be carrying messages, but they tied messages on these legs. They'd read these stories about how they used to do it in World War I, and they'd send messages behind lions and pigeons. I tell you, that experiment didn't last very long because all of our pigeons would run away as fast as we'd catch them. And we did have a couple of scary accidents there, and the guys were trying to catch them at night in the dark in the barn and not get caught. And they fell. They had one guy break his ankle, another broke his arm. So we got out of the pigeon business. Seemed like every kid in our hometown had a dog. Some of them had more than one. And those dogs got to be such a nuisance that Big John Madden, our town constable, he kept loading them up and taking them somewhere. And we thought, where is he taking them? And he was taking them to the Mississippi River and drowning them. That's the way he got rid of them. They didn't have dog pounds then. No place to take them and drop them off. So my dad sold his grocery business, and we moved to Colorado because my mother had asthma. We had to live in a higher, drier climate. So we moved to Colorado. We didn't have any big Mississippi rivers there in Colorado, but we had mountains. And we used to go up in the mountains and camp and hunt and have fun. And up above Greeley and Fort Collins, there was a whole chain of lakes, and they were called the Red Feather Lakes. And that's where the Indians used to have their big villages and things, the Utes in Colorado. And we'd go up there, and then there was an area in Colorado that we could go visit where the Pueblo Indians, where they lived in the side of the cliffs. And we thought we would take a weekend hike up there with our scout group. And our scout leader was he was a postman. He delivered mail to people, and he was our scout leader, Mr. Peterson. And we all had to wear uniforms, or if we didn't have a full uniform, at least a shirt or something, to prove to the world that we were Boy Scouts, the saviors of America. And he would take us on these trips, and after every trip, he would swear up and down that he was not taking us anywhere, and he wasn't going to be responsible for us because we were all unprincipled little hooligans. That was his favorite terms. You're a mean little hooligan, or what's wrong with you, boy? Don't you understand the English language? And we used to laugh, and we used to just go out of our way to keep him on his tiptoes, you know. But he took us to 3 or 4 of these scout jamborees and things. And everybody was a scout. And you could be a scout then for any reason under the sun. But if you were an athlete and could play on the softball team, that would qualify you. But you had to do some memory work. Well, we had some of our best players that couldn't do the memory work. So that was a noble experiment. But Colorado was fun. It was, we went to a completely different environment and fit right in, because boys will be boys anywhere, and they're more alike than they're different. And I can remember then we were interested in girls, and money was more plentiful, and jobs were more plentiful. Practically every kid had a job. He was working when he wasn't in school, and he was making big money. I know I worked in a store for Safeway. They paid me 62 cents an hour. And I'd work the weekends, and that was my spending money. And to try to get interested in a girl and take her to movies and buy her a bag of popcorn and go out and get a dish of ice cream after or something, that 62 cents an hour didn't last very long, Henry. But it was kind of interesting because life hasn't changed very much. You get a bunch of young guys together, and their hormones are raging, and they are interested in girls, and they dream and tell the big lies, big spoofs, we used to call them. I kissed her last night. I held her hand. I put my hand on her shoulder. And then we'd say, yeah, and you got your face slapped too, didn't you? And it was true. And the girls, they used to know how to set us guys up. That was the most... Had this one friend called Bobby Joe Caps. And Bobby liked the women, and he'd come from his weekend escapades and dates, come back to school on Monday, and he'd be fingernail scratches on his cheek. One gal hit him in the eye, trying to hit him in the nose, and he had a black eye for a week. And that was just make-believe, you know. Nobody could tell the truth. One guy couldn't tell a big enough tale. I made out with this gal. You know what making out was with? He got to hold her hand, and he walked her home.
What is the greatest mystery in life that you wish you could have solved?
The greatest mystery in my life that I wished I could have solved and never happened was going to North Korea. I was a brand new second lieutenant, Henry, and I thought, another adventure. But nobody told me that it was an adventure that almost took my life, because I was a ranger, and I was in air rescue and survival. And I thought air rescue and survival meant all you had to do is get in an airplane, go in, pick somebody up, you rescued them, and hopefully they would survive. But that wasn't exactly how it worked out, because they dropped you behind enemy lines as the paratrooper in a rescue team, and they didn't come in and pick you up in a plane. They were interested in you locating the pilot that had been shot down behind the Yalu River, and you put them on a whirlybird. And you know this MASH movies that they showed, Hawkeye and all of those, the medical doctors? That's the only kind of whirlybirds they had. You could strap a dead man or a wounded man on the runners, fly him back to a MASH unit, but the rescue team had to wade back across the Yalu River and get back home. I wondered, how did I get into this mystery? How was I so dumb as a bright second lieutenant to think that all I'd have to do is fly in, get out of the plane, pick them up, and come back? Didn't work that way. And that was a mystery I wish that I'd have solved before I got there to solve it, because I got a wound, and I had to report to a MASH unit. And by the time I got to the MASH unit, they fixed me up. It was too dark to go back to my air base where I was stationed. And then I had to hot-foot it unless I could catch a ride. And you never knew if anybody was going the way you were going. And more often than not, you'd walk several miles getting back. But it was a mystery. I thought to myself, I'm going to read the fine print. I'm going to check everything out carefully. And that's what I wish I'd have solved. Wished I'd have been smart enough to read the fine print before I got there.
Do you remember the old radio shows that they'd play back in the old 40s, 50s?
Oh, yeah.
Where there was all the dramas and broadcasts, stuff like that.
Molly McGee and Fibber and Molly McGee. You remember them?
I don't remember any of them.
Oh, boy, they were Jack Benny. You know Jack Benny, don't you? I don't know. Rochester. Jack Benny was one of the greatest comedians that ever drew a breath. And Fibber McGee and Molly were right in that same category.
Who was your favorite?
Who was my favorite? I like Jack Benny and Rochester. Rochester was his black foil. And Rochester was a brilliant comedian in his own right. And Jack Benny was a great comedian. I could sit there. I loved all those old things. Of course, the radio was the big thing then. And tell you a lot of things that the young folks really got into was Jack Armstrong, the all-American boy. Did you remember Jack Armstrong? You didn't. The Shadow. Did you remember the Shadow where the door would open and it'd go, yeah. And I tell you, we didn't miss those. Didn't miss them. And then there was the Lone Ranger. You remember the Lone Ranger? I heard that one. Yeah. He had a sidekick, too, named Tonto. He had Silver. Remember all the old cowboys? Roy Rogers and Trigger. And Gene Autry and Champ. And Tim McGee. Oh, I tell you, those were the exciting days.
What was the happiest moment of your life?
Happiest moment of my life? There were so many of those moments that I can't really remember which was the happiest, but one that was particularly happy, though, was when I had my first son. You know, a man always thinks that, wonder what my first son will look like. And I don't know what I was expecting, but I remember the nurse showing me my son, and I said, he doesn't have any hair. My wife said, what did you think of your son? I said, he didn't have any hair. And she said, well, he did so. He's got a dark head of hair. The nurse had shown me the wrong one. I was glad to find out, Henry, that my son had hair. I got to go back and see the right one then.
What do you consider the greatest invention of your lifetime?
The greatest what?
Invention.
Adventure?
Invention.
Oh, invention? Well, I don't know, but I think Alexander Graham Bell and the telephone had to be one. I can remember when the telephone was just getting started really good, and they had these telephones that you have to ring before you can talk to anybody. And I can remember my grandmother, and in our community, you were on a certain line and you had to have a certain ringing motion, how many cranks, and that would tell you who you were going to be talking to. The only thing about that, though, you had to be careful what you said, Henry, because you were on party lines. And the minute you would call somebody, everybody on that line would pick it up and listen in. You couldn't have any private conversations. But I don't know, I've always thought the telephone and the radio were great inventions.
What is your greatest regret?
Well, my greatest regret is that in my life I probably didn't take many things as serious as I should have, and probably focused more on subjects and areas that didn't amount to a hill of beans.
What is your favorite music or musician?
My favorite music is kind of dance band rhythm. And I developed an appreciation for that because in Colorado, they had these dance gardens, and like one in Denver called Elitch's. And I remember you could go there and pretty cheaply take a date, and you could listen to Ralph Flanagan and his Band of Renown, and Harry James and his Golden Trumpet, and you could get into the Count Basie, all of the major dance bands, black and white and so on, and that was fun.
What do you fear most for or about the current and future generations?
I fear the most that the future generation isn't going to have a bright and promising one. They're not going to be able to enjoy or survive as well as the preceding generation did. And I think that parents today and grandparents, they worry that their kids and their future grandkids, they're not going to be able to survive in a good style. And I think that that could very well become a reality.
Well, those are the end of my questions. Do you have any more stories that you would like to share?
I have a lot of stories, but I had friends that graduated from high school with me that one was a riverboat captain on the Mississippi River there in Missouri, and he was used to sail the very same routes on his riverboat thing that Mark Twain, when they talked about Mark Twain and when he was a riverboat captain and so on. And his name was Melvin Green, and he was always going to be a riverboat captain. And everybody laughed at him, and he turned out to be a riverboat captain, made great money, had a great career out of it. And when he was a kid, since junior high on, he was going to be a riverboat captain. And I went back to a class reunion 40 years after I graduated from high school. And he was there, and he says, "You never did come back for that boat ride, I promised you." He died 2 years later. I got there a little too late and then didn't get back soon enough either. You know how we all have a lot of ideas about what we're going to be and what we'd like to be, and we really don't know what we're talking about, because I can recall I thought, I'm going to be a farmer like my grandpa. I'm going to be a farmer like my Uncle Leland. And I only saw the easy side of being a farmer when I would visit. But one summer, my dad, once I got old enough to really work, my dad had a job for me in his business, and it wasn't what I wanted to be. I didn't want to be a groceryman or, a storekeeper or delivering groceries to other stores and working in a meat plant and a frozen food plant. I didn't want that. I wanted to be something exciting like a farmer. That one summer I worked with my uncle and my grandpa. They were going to teach me how to be a farmer. And my uncle had a devilish sense of humor, Henry. He said, yeah, you can drive the mules. That's before they all had tractors. And he said, you can help in the hay fields. You can help us put up the hay. And I said, oh, boy, I can't wait. That's going to be fun. Well, it took me a week to learn to put the harness on the mules. And then to get them hitched up to the wagon was something else, because they are stubborn creatures. And so I thought, I'm not going to try to put the harness on them out in the barn corral there. I'm going to put the harness on inside the barn, and then I'm going to take them out and hook them up. But the mules, the people that have been working them and spanking their butts when they step out of line, they mind them pretty well, real quick like. Well, I didn't like to thump on them and beat on them. And so putting them on in the garage, in the barn, I found out why that wasn't a good idea, because you get them in a confined space there, putting them on, and they crowd you over, and they try to push you against the wall. And I was yelling and cussing and trying to get over there, Sam, get over there, Dick. And they'd turn that big head around and look at me, who are you, boy? And so my uncle said, aren't you ever going to learn to put those on? And he said, look, it's easy. He'd walk over there and put that harness on those mules, and they'd sit there. I said, they don't act like that for me. He said, well, you got to get tough with it. You got to thump them when they try to take advantage of you. So it worked on some of them, but I had one there, that's Sam, that mule they had called Sam. He'd kick me all the time. Not when I'm looking at him. The minute I would turn, he would kick out at me. And many times he kicked me. I had a bruise on a hip and on a knee. So I said, well, I'm going to have to be mean. I picked up a piss elm club, they call them. And it's green, and when you hit him with it, it whops back. And I guess it must sting, because he kicked me, I hit him. He kicked me again, I hit him. So I went up in front of him, I hit him right between the ears. He went, and fell down. My uncle come running in, and he said, what'd you do to that mule? I said, well, you said if he kicked me to hit him. Well, where did you hit him? That mule got up, and he was shaking his head. And that was the last of the mules, Henry. My uncle said, you can't have him around those mules. He's going to end up killing them. And mule will cost a lot of money then. A good mule will cost you $75. And back in those days, $75 was a lot. But I didn't want to be a farmer then. Another one was milking. You used to have to milk all by hand. And I would milk and milk and milk. And then my grandparents would come along and remilk. I couldn't get it all out of their bag. And if you didn't get that milk out of their big bag, it spoiled in there and created problems. So I figured, well, that isn't something I'm good at. And out in those hay fields, I was 15 and I thought I was a man, Henry. I had some pretty good muscles and so on. By the end of each day in that haying season, I could hardly waddle to bed. And I would take a quick dip in the either the water trough, or I didn't have the running showers and things like that out on the farms then. But I tell you, I lost my desire to be a farmer after one summer with them. And I thought, you can be a farmer. But grocery business, what I liked about it, I met a lot of people. And people are mostly friendly and outgoing. And you found that out when you worked in Len's store, didn't you? Yeah. They appreciate it when you help them to the car. And my dad said, you know, you're going to work in the store here, and the customer's always right. He said customers are too hard to come by to lose them by being disrespectful and snotty. And he said, when they offer you money for carrying the groceries to the car, you tell them, no, ma'am. Thank you anyway. And it was fun. And actually, I couldn't see myself pursuing a career as a storekeeper, but at that stage in my life, I didn't know what I was going to even consider being, let alone what I end up in terms of a career. But that's life. It's full of surprises. Look at all the fun you got ahead of you, Henry. And you've already had experiences that most young people probably won't have during a lifetime. So you'll be able to spin some stories that'll set them on their ears, Henry. I've always kind of been blessed with a memory. I can remember to this date every one of my grade school teachers, junior high teachers, high school teachers. I can remember most of the teachers I've had when I was in my undergraduate degrees and master degrees and so on. I'm a people person. I like to see people, like you and I were discussing earlier, that what is the most fun about going places, doing things, and I think you shared with me people. And I think people are the most interesting aspect and thing that we've got going for us in the world. And they reveal, vividly how different our personalities are. Henry, I'm out of time.